Today I'm going to talk about constraints bringing clarity to animal behavior, hopefully. The work was done as a collaboration with Ted Pavlich, Kelsey Sitano-Anolias, Brent Ewers, Shilpa Iyer, Andre Seal, and Yu Zhang. The question we're asking in this symposium is whether resource limitation is a tie that binds social systems. Now we can ask a slightly broader question. What resources are even relevant for the structure of a social system? Or we could go broader still, asking whether there are resources that are relevant to life at any possible hierarchical scale. Now I'll start here and come around to the narrower questions. Hopefully you'll see the logic behind this approach. Now this larger question was the basis of a countrywide set of workshops run by NSF called Reintegrating Biology Jumpstart. The workshops were designed to get people thinking about science across all scales. Our group focused on identifying resources that can describe living systems across all spatio-temporal scales. The rationale was that identifying and studying scale invariant resources can help us integrate ideas across disciplines that address life at different scales. Now we posed 4 resources that appear to be critical elements of any biological system, be it signal transduction in a cell, or foraging, or the functioning of a population, or the functioning of an entire ecosystem. The resources are energy, conductance, storage, and information. Now energy is hopefully easy enough to think about. Gibbs free energy will work. Conductance is a resource in the sense that it's a property of a system that facilitates the flux of energy, or for that matter, mass. And similarly, storage is a resource in the sense that it results from an accumulation of flux, so for example, energy storage. Now information is something that's defined in many ways by lots of different people. But there is a specific definition that makes it a relevant part of this list, and in fact, it makes it extremely important in this room, albeit virtual. In short, information is a part of a dynamic process that causes a reduction in uncertainty in a system. Claude Shannon, arguably the godfather of information, said that information is the resolution of uncertainty. I think we can all agree that communication is the glue that binds social systems, and that the function of communication is to provide information to a receiver about some state, such that the receiver's level of uncertainty about that state is diminished. But we need to be really clear about exactly what this statement means. So for example, if I say, that's a Wheaten Terrier, you might be thinking that information here is about the dog, but that's an inadequate description of this process. In fact, information is a much broader concept than this. So information generally relates to a change in uncertainty about your environment, and that level of uncertainty decreases when I say, that's a Wheaten Terrier. Hopefully it makes more sense to you now that cell-cell signaling and signal transduction across the cell membrane does the same thing as my sentence. It reduces the uncertainty, in this case, in the state of a cell. Now a beautiful example is the neutrophil innate immune response. These cells coordinate their attack on bacteria by signaling to other neutrophils through a G protein coupled receptor. The problem is that too much neutrophil swarming can generate inflammation, which is actually quite a bad thing. Keenly et al. Showed that neutrophils use another protein signal, GPCR2, which desensitizes the receptors, thereby limiting the intensity of the swarm. The point is that both signaling pathways, including signals that both facilitate swarming and signals that damp down swarming, reduce variability in the system-wide immune response. which is information flow. Cell-cell signaling reduces variability in this system. So irrespective of the scale of the phenomenon, be it at the cell, organ, individual, population, community, or even ecosystem level, information is a resource that reduces the uncertainty of a system. Now, I need for you to embrace that thought and expand it in all possible directions in your mind. I'm going to talk about energy resources and information resources at two different scales to illustrate why the concept works really at all levels. I'll first talk about mixed species bird flocks. This is going kind of small. And then I'm going to talk about the massive ungulate migrations in the African savanna. This is going very large indeed. Let's start small. 4 species of birds are common in the winter in mixed species flocks in the upper Midwest: chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, and woodpeckers. Now we'll focus mostly on chickadees and titmice since we have a much more complete picture of these 2 species. We studied the mixed species flocks in 2 sites, one disturbed and the other not disturbed. The disturbed site was a closed canopy forest with several walnut groves in it. Trees within the groves were pretty small and certainly low quality habitat for birds. The rest of the site was normal, albeit somewhat thinned, Indiana hardwood forest. The undisturbed site has been left alone for at least 75 years. It's a mature, closed canopy forest. The only manipulation was a series of walking trails. So as for energetic resources, the birds in the disturbed site were clearly energy limited. So for example, they spent more time foraging compared to the birds at the undisturbed site, as you can see here. And they carried less fat. Now this is a plot of the frequency distribution of fat scores, essentially how much fat we can see on the belly of the bird. 0 means that we saw no fat, 4 means that we saw lots of fat. Now the birds in the disturbed site in the winter had significantly less fat than the birds in the undisturbed site. And less fat stores in winter in Indiana is arguably a very bad thing. There are 2 important behavioral responses to this energy limitation at the disturbed site. One is that the birds abandon territoriality and increase space use 2 to 5 times compared to the birds in the undisturbed site. Now this was true of both titmice on the left and chickadees on the right. The second behavioral response is that the social network at the disturbed site was quite extensive, with 2, call it linked groups. Each symbol here represents a banded bird. Each line means that we saw those birds flocking together. The thicker the line, the more often we saw them together. Now the spatial distribution of these birds in the 2 groups overlapped extensively. There were no territories. In contrast, the social networks in the undisturbed site were smaller and more modular. And space use by the small unconnected networks was much more constrained than we saw in the disturbed site. Each polygon here represents a separate network module. These birds are clearly territorial. Now the network differences extend to heterospecific interactions. The number of heterospecific network associations, which here is degree, is substantially larger for both titmice and chickadees in the disturbed site compared to the undisturbed site. So birds in low quality habitat need to integrate information over large areas in order to offset energy deficiencies. So when it comes to social behavior, energy resources matter a lot. Information acquisition is facilitated by the formation of large, diverse, and spatially distributed social networks. So when it comes to social behavior, information resources matter a lot. So let's go big now. Now, McNaughton et al. Described huge migrations of ungulates across the African savanna. that result from shared information processing between individuals that dictate the path of these migrations. Now, the most amazing part of this amazing phenomenon results from ungulate excretion production coupling migration patterns to nutrient recycling. This enhances plant growth, providing more energy to the herd when it returns in its migratory trajectory. This migration nutrient recycling feedback loop is an example of a phenomenon called Nicheconstruction, which in this case is an alteration of the environment in a way that increases the viability and stability of the entire ecosystem. Now we've circled back to information. Nicheconstruction reduces variability. And remember, information, it causes a reduction in uncertainty in a system, which here works at a massive scale. The point is that Nicheconstruction is by definition stored information. So ungulates integrate social information to ride a temporal and spatial wave of quality plant forage of their own making, constituting Nicheconstruction on a truly grand scale. So when it comes to the structure of this ecosystem, energy resources matter a lot. This example also illustrates that Nicheconstruction results from information storage, here at the ecosystem scale. So when it comes to the structure of this ecosystem, information resources matter a lot. The broader points are that understanding scale invariance in resources helps us think more clearly about scale-dependent phenomena. And information is a resource whose processing is a fundamental property of social systems. But another property of social systems is that they increase scale. So obviously things get bigger when you put more individuals together. And increased scale facilitates Nicheconstruction, which increases information storage. Now we talked about two systems that show us that small networks can be used to increase information flow, to help animals utilize energy resources more efficiently. And large networks can increase information storage through Nicheconstruction. We saw this in ungulates. Of course, you can see this in wasps. And you can see this in termites, and in ants, and in other, random species. So let's get back to that first question. Is resource limitation a tie that binds social systems? At small scales, I think the answer is fairly unequivocally yes. But at larger scales, maybe not, because social systems that are large enough may be able to manipulate resources themselves through Nicheconstruction. So maybe large-scale social systems bind resources, not the other way around. There's one last thing I want to talk about. Now, I have one modification to the sort of small story that I talked about, that Nicheconstruction can actually act at relatively small scales. All species in our mixed species flocks cache food in some habitats when they find it in excess. Cached food is used when the bird has difficulty finding food otherwise, say during a snowstorm. So the function of food caching is to reduce variance in energy intake rates, which is, by definition, information storage. However, cached food is only useful if the bird can get it when it's needed, which is most likely on small, defended territories. So the expanded space use in our degraded habitat actually reduces the value of food caching, which in turn increases the importance of information flow through an expanded social network. Go figure. Now, thanks to NSF for running the workshop that made it possible for us to think about all of these questions, and to Amy and Letitia for letting us talk about our work.